He was one of the most powerful men in America. He had fought presidents, survived prison, and built an empire of labor that touched millions of lives. On a summer afternoon in 1975, he drove to a meeting. He never came home, and 50 years later, no one has ever been charged. July 30th, 1975, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the Machus Red Fox Restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, a Detroit suburb known for its upscale dining rooms and deep, quiet booths. A 62-year-old man in a Navy sport jacket pulls into the parking lot. He checks his watch. He walks in. He waits. The men he came to meet are not there. At around 2:15, he walks to a payphone outside a hardware store next door. He calls his wife. He tells her nobody showed up. He is angry. He says he will be home around 4. That phone call, those last ordinary words to his wife Josephine, is the last confirmed communication anyone ever had with Jimmy Hoffa. Before 4 o'clock, witnesses see him climb into a maroon Mercury. He was never seen again. The next morning, his friend Louis Linteau drove to the restaurant. Hoffa's car was still there, unlocked, undisturbed, no sign of struggle, no sign of Jimmy. The FBI was called. Michigan State Police were brought in. More than 200 federal agents were ultimately assigned to the case. In the first 5 years alone, investigators compiled over 70 volumes of files, more than 16,000 pages. 50 years later, no arrest has ever been made. If America's unexplained mysteries keep you up at night, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Mistionix USA so you never miss what we uncover next. Hit the like button if this story is already getting to you. Now, let's go back to the beginning. James Riddle Hoffa was born on February 14, 1913, in Brazil, Indiana. His family moved to Detroit when he was a child, and by his teens, he was already fighting for workers on the factory floor. At 19, he organized a strike at a Kroger grocery warehouse and won. He joined the Teamsters in 1933. By 1937, he was running a local chapter. By 1957, he was the most powerful labor leader in America, General President of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, a union that would eventually represent more than 2 million workers. Power made enemies. Chief among them was Robert F. Kennedy, chief counsel of the Senate Rackets Committee, who pursued Hoffa relentlessly throughout the late 1950s and into the 1960s. Kennedy believed, and the evidence increasingly supported, that Hoffa had deep and deliberate ties to organized crime, that he was using the Teamsters' vast pension fund as a private bank for the mob. The war between Kennedy and Hoffa was one of the defining feuds of the era. Kennedy's pursuit eventually caught up with Hoffa. In 1964, he was convicted of jury tampering and pension fraud. In 1967, a judge sentenced him to 13 years in federal prison. He entered Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in December of that year. But even from behind bars, Hoffa refused to accept defeat. And in December 1971, President Richard Nixon commuted his sentence with one critical condition. Hoffa could not engage in union management, directly or indirectly, until March 1980. While Hoffa was in prison, his hand-picked successor, Frank Fitzsimmons, had taken over the union, and the mob had discovered something useful about Fitzsimmons. He was far more accommodating than Hoffa had ever been. The Teamsters Central States Pension Fund worth hundreds of millions of dollars, was being loaned out to organized crime figures to build and sustain Las Vegas casinos. The mob needed Fitzsimmons to stay in that chair, or Jimmy Hoffa coming back was a threat they could not afford. Hoffa refused to honor the restriction on his union activities. He argued he had never agreed to it. He challenged it in court repeatedly. He gave speeches. He worked the phones. By 1975, a Teamsters presidential election was approaching. The mob did not want Hoffa anywhere near that race. Hoffa believed nothing bad could happen to him in his own city. He had lived in Detroit his whole life. He knew everyone. He was wrong. The meeting on July 30th was supposedly a peace summit. Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a high-ranking enforcer in the Detroit mob, and Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano, a capo in the New Jersey Genovese crime family, would sit down with Hoffa and smooth things over. That was the story. Both Giacalone and Provenzano, it later turned out, had airtight alibis for that afternoon. They were not at the restaurant. The whole meeting had been a setup. The primary physical evidence was a car, a maroon 1975 Mercury Marquis brougham, registered to Joseph Giacalone, Tony Giacalone's son. The car had been borrowed that day by Charles Chucky O'Brien, a man who had grown up in the Hoffa household, the closest thing Jimmy Hoffa had to an adopted son. Investigators found O'Brien's fingerprints inside the car. More critically, trained police dogs detected Hoffa's scent in the rear passenger seat, and a single strand of hair recovered from the back seat was confirmed by DNA testing in 2001 to belong to Jimmy Hoffa. O'Brien's explanation was that he had used the car to deliver a large salmon that day. FBI investigators did not find this convincing. The 1976 Hoffex Memo, a 56-page internal FBI report, concluded that O'Brien was driving the car and that Hoffa was seated in the right rear seat. The memo described O'Brien as a habitual liar. Investigators believed he had been used as an unwitting lure, someone whose familiar face would get Hoffa into a car he might otherwise have refused. The Hoffex Memo was blunt. The FBI concluded that Hoffa's disappearance was directly connected to his attempts to regain power in the Teamsters, and that his return would have threatened organized crime's control of the union's pension fund. The memo named Russell Bufalino, the Pennsylvania crime boss, as the most likely figure to have ordered the murder. The man most investigators believe pulled the trigger was Salvatore Briguglio, known as Sally Bugs, a trusted enforcer for Provenzano with a long history of violence. The theory is that Briguglio was in the car when Hoffa was picked up, and that Hoffa was driven to a location in Detroit where the murder took place. Briguglio never talked. On the night of March 21st, 1978, see, he was shot 4 times in the head and once in the chest on Mulberry Street in New York City's Little Italy. He was silenced before he could ever be questioned under oath. In 2004, a book changed the popular understanding of the case. I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt was based on a claimed confession by Frank the Irishman Sheeran, a Teamsters official and alleged mob hitman who had been one of Hoffa's closest allies. According to Sheeran, he had personally shot Hoffa inside a Detroit house at the order of Russell Bufalino. The book became the basis for Martin Scorsese's 2019 film, The Irishman, starring Robert De Niro Al Pacino, and Joe Pesci. But Sheeran's confession has serious problems. In 2004, Bloomfield Township police tore up the floorboards of the specific house Sheeran had identified as the murder scene. The FBI crime lab analyzed what they found. Their conclusion: the blood on those floorboards was not Jimmy Hoffa's. Many FBI veterans who worked the Hoffa case say Sheeran was not present at the murder. The confession made for a dramatic film. Whether it made for accurate history is a different matter. But the search for Hoffa's body has been one of the most exhaustive and most fruitless physical investigations in American crime history. In 2003, police demolished a backyard swimming pool in Bay City on a convict's tip. Nothing. In 2006, the FBI spent 14 days excavating a horse farm in Wixom, Michigan. Nothing. In 2013, 40 FBI agents with cadaver dogs and an earth mover tore up a field in Oakland Township. Nothing. In 2021, federal agents dug at a former landfill near the Pulaski Skyway in Jersey City, New Jersey. Nothing. Every excavation was driven by a tip. Every excavation ended in silence. No theory has captured the American imagination quite like the Giant Stadium legend. The claim, first put forward by mob informant Donald Francos, was that Hoffa's body was buried beneath the concrete of the end zone at Giant Stadium in New Jersey, which was under construction in the summer of 1975. The stadium opened in 1976. It was demolished in 2010. The site was covered with 13 feet of concrete. The FBI has consistently said it does not believe this theory. No excavation of the stadium was ever conducted. The most persistent, serious theory about the body's location centers on New Jersey. Investigative journalist Dan Moldea, who has spent more than 50 years on this case, and multiple mob informants have pointed to a dump in Jersey City connected to a Provenzano associate. Moldea's theory is that Vito Giacalone drove the car that took Hoffa from the restaurant. Bergoglio killed him, and the body was ultimately buried at that New Jersey site, which later became an EPA Superfund cleanup location. The FBI excavated the site in 2021. They found nothing. In July 2025, exactly 50 years after Hoffa's disappearance, Detroit crime historian Scott Bernstein held a public event claiming he had identified the actual killer and the location of Hoffa's body. Bernstein said, "The FBI already knows. They might not come out and say it, but the FBI has come to the same conclusion we have." The FBI Detroit field office responded by inviting anyone with information to file a tip. They did not confirm or deny Bernstein's claims. On July 30th, 2025, the exact 50th anniversary of Hoffa's disappearance, the FBI Detroit field office issued a public statement. Special Agent in Charge Chevoria Gibson said the Bureau remains steadfast in its commitment to pursuing all credible leads. The investigation, the FBI confirmed, remains active. The case file is open. Anyone with information is urged to come forward. In that same week, Hoffa's son, James P. Hoffa, appeared in a Fox Nation special and addressed President Trump directly. "Release the files. I don't know what's in those files. The American public, the Teamsters Union, our family deserve it." In October 2025, the White House directed the FBI to formally reopen the case. No public findings have been announced. Every man believed to have been central to Hoffa's murder is now dead. Anthony Giacalone died in 2002, never charged in the Hoffa case. Anthony Provenzano died in prison in 1988, convicted of an unrelated murder but never charged with Hoffa's disappearance. Russell Bufalino, believed to have ordered the killing, died in 1994. Salvatore Briguglio was shot dead in 1978. The case will almost certainly never be prosecuted. The witnesses are gone. The suspects are gone. What remains are files, theories, and a family that has never stopped asking. The question of where Jimmy Hoffa is buried has never been answered. The theories span Michigan fields, Detroit houses, New Jersey landfills, Florida swamps, the floor of a crematorium, and the concrete of a demolished stadium. What all of them have in common is this: not one of them has produced a single bone. In 50 years of searching, no physical remains have ever been found. Jimmy Hoffa simply vanished. What the Hoffa case leaves behind is not just a mystery. It is a portrait of an America where power and corruption were so deeply entangled that the most powerful labor leader in the country could be murdered in broad daylight, and no one who ordered it, no one who carried it out, no one who drove the car has ever stood before a jury. The FBI believes it knows what happened. Some of the agents who worked the case say they know exactly who did it, but knowing and proving are different things. And in the Hoffa case, 50 years on, the proof has never come. The Machus Red Fox Restaurant closed years ago. The building at 6676 Telegraph Road in Bloomfield Township is now an Italian steakhouse called Andiamo. People eat dinner there. Nobody marks the spot. But the case has never closed. The FBI continues to accept tips. Hoffa's family continues to push for file declassification. And every few years, somewhere in Michigan or New Jersey, someone with a shovel and a story persuades investigators to dig one more time. July 30th, 1975. A 62-year-old man drove to a restaurant for a 2 o'clock meeting. He waited. He made a phone call. He got into a car. And America's most powerful labor leader, a man who had faced down presidents, survived federal prosecution, and built a union that shaped the daily life of millions, disappeared without a trace. His body has never been found. No one has ever been charged. And 50 years after that summer afternoon in Michigan, the question that has outlasted every suspect, every search, and every theory remains exactly where Jimmy Hoffa left it, unanswered. This mystery is still open, and at Mistianix USA, we keep looking. If this story got under your skin, subscribe, like, and drop your theory in the comments. Where do you think Jimmy Hoffa is? We'll see you in the next mystery.